He was 78 years old, diabetic, partially blind, and confined to a wheelchair in a California state prison when he finally started talking. And what he said would shatter every record in American criminal history. 93 murders, 19 states, 35 years of killing and getting away with it. His name was Samuel Little, and for most of his adult life, he operated in plain sight, drifting from city to city, from Florida to California, from Ohio to Texas, picking up women on the margins of society and strangling them with his bare hands. Women the world had largely stopped looking for. Women whose deaths were ruled overdoses, accidents, or natural causes. Women whose cases were never opened because no one could see that the same man had been responsible for all of them. He was a former amateur boxer. He was extraordinarily strong, and he understood with predatory precision exactly which women were least likely to be missed. For nearly half a century, no one connected the dots. Not until a Texas Ranger with a hunch and a very unusual way of getting killers to talk sat across from Samuel Little in an interview room and spent 700 hours listening. What he heard was one of the most disturbing confessions in the history of American law enforcement. This is Closed File Number 2. Samuel Little. Samuel McDowell was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia. He was raised primarily by his grandmother in Lorain, Ohio, after his mother, a teenage woman working as a maid, abandoned him as an infant. He would later say that by the time he was a child, he had already begun having violent fantasies about strangling women. He was 16 when he was first arrested, convicted of breaking and entering in Omaha, Nebraska, and sent to a juvenile institution. His mother's whereabouts were listed on the booking card as unknown. He took up boxing during his time incarcerated, eventually referring to himself as a former prizefighter, a detail that would matter enormously decades later, when investigators tried to understand why his victims showed so little visible evidence of trauma. By 1975, at the age of 35, Samuel Little had been arrested 26 times in 11 states for crimes including theft, assault, fraud, and attacks on government officials. He moved constantly. He worked odd jobs. He had a long-term girlfriend, Aurelia Dorsey, who supported them both largely through shoplifting. He kept drifting, from Florida to California, from Ohio to Mississippi, never staying long enough in any one place for anyone to notice the pattern he was leaving behind. The killing, by his own account, began in 1970. On December 31st of that year, 33-year-old Mary Jo Brosley sat beside Samuel Little in his car on a secluded road near Miami, Florida. She was frail, barely 80 pounds, estranged from her 2 children in Massachusetts, struggling with alcoholism. Little had met her in a bar just hours before, on the final night of the year. He later told investigators he admired the way the moonlight illuminated her throat. "I had desires," he said, "strong desires to choke her." Mary Brosley became the first known victim of America's most prolific serial killer. But she would not be the last. Over the next 35 years, Samuel Little would travel across the country committing murders that almost no one connected to a single offender. His method was consistent. He targeted women on the fringes of society. Women struggling with addiction, homeless women, women whose lives had already placed them outside the protection that mainstream society extended to others. He would strangle them with his powerful hands, applying pressure with a precision that a former boxer uniquely possessed, in a way that frequently left little external evidence of violence. Many of his victims were ruled drug overdoses. Some were ruled natural causes. Some were never even classified as homicides. He understood the system in a way that is almost impossible to comprehend in retrospect. He later told investigators directly, He thought these women would leave fewer clues for authorities to find and leave fewer persons to search for them. He was right. The victims stretched across the country, across 19 different states, from Florida to South Carolina, from California to Virginia. He strangled women in bars and hotel rooms and car seats. He left bodies in alleys, dumpsters, vacant lots, rivers, and roadside fields. He never used a gun. He never used a knife. Just his hands. And then he moved on. For most of Samuel Little's active years, there was no investigation. That is the most important and most devastating fact about this case. The murders were happening. The women were dying. But because so many deaths were misclassified as overdoses, as accidents, as natural causes, no one was looking for a serial killer. No one was looking for a pattern, because there was no pattern anyone could see. Occasionally, Little came close to being caught. In 1982, he was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and faced questions about the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose Laprie, who had gone missing that September. A grand jury declined to indict him. That same year, he was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount, whose body had been found in September 1982. Witnesses placed Little near Mount on the night before her disappearance. The jury acquitted him in January 1984. In 1984, he was arrested in California for kidnapping, beating, and strangling 22-year-old Lori Barros, who survived. 1 month later, police found him in the back seat of his car with another unconscious woman, beaten and strangled, in the same location. He served 2.5 years in prison for both crimes. He was released in February 1987 and immediately moved to Los Angeles, where he committed at least 10 additional murders. The system had held him, released him, and handed him back to the streets. The breakthrough that would eventually end his killing came not through a cold case detective, not through a witness, but through a routine narcotics arrest. On September 5, 2012, Samuel Little was arrested at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky, and extradited to California on a drug charge. What happened next is a story about what DNA evidence, combined with long overdue attention to previously dismissed cases, can accomplish. California investigators used DNA testing to establish that Little was connected to the murders of 3 Los Angeles women: Linda Alford, killed on July 13, 1987, whose body had been found in an alley; Audrey Nelson Everett, found in a dumpster behind a nightclub on August 14, 1989; and Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, discovered at an abandoned auto repair shop on September 3, 1989, after a boy kicking a soccer ball against the building peered through the windows and saw her body. All 3 women had been strangled. All 3 had DNA that matched Samuel Little. He was charged in January 2013. In September 2014, after a trial in which witnesses testified about Little's pattern of behavior across decades, he was convicted of all 3 murders. On September 25, 2014, Samuel Little was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. On the day of the verdict, he continued to insist he was innocent, screaming, "I didn't do it," in open court. It would take another 4 years for the full scale of what he had done to become known. Samuel Little was 77 years old and already serving multiple life sentences when Texas Ranger James Holland walked into his interview room at the California State Prison in May 2018. Holland had been working a cold case in Odessa, Texas, the 1994 murder of 32-year-old Denise Christie Brothers, a mother of 2 whose strangled body had been found on February 2nd of that year. A tip had connected the case to Little. Holland flew to California. The first meeting did not go well. Little tested him immediately, describing in graphic detail how he had killed a woman while locking eyes with Holland, watching for a reaction. Holland did not flinch. He sat and listened. You couldn't react to his negativity. When you deal with a serial killer, there's no remorse. I had to convince him I was okay with that, Holland explained. Most investigators would have appealed to remorse, to the families of victims, to the notion of doing the right thing before death. Holland avoided all of it deliberately. He understood something about Samuel Little that most people couldn't bring themselves to accept. Little had no remorse. He never had. And appealing to something he didn't feel would close every door. Instead, Holland did something unusual. He addressed Little as Sammy. He brought him food. Over subsequent visits, they shared pizza and milkshakes and grits. Holland listened, not to catch him in contradictions, not to challenge him, but to let Little be what he most wanted to be in that room, the one in control of the story. It worked. In the first full confession session, Little talked about a Texas murder, Denise Brothers in Odessa. He described the partial denture she was wearing. Investigators checked the autopsy report. The denture was real. It had never been publicly disclosed. It was the kind of detail only the killer would know. Over the next 2.5 years, through more than 700 hours of recorded interviews, including an extended 48-day period after Holland arranged for Little to be extradited to Texas, having negotiated with the local district attorney to take the death penalty off the table, Samuel Little confessed to 93 murders. He confessed with extraordinary specificity. He described what his victims looked like. He remembered the bars and hotels where he found them. He remembered the roads where he left them. He drew portraits of their faces from memory, detailed, lifelike pencil drawings of women he had killed decades earlier, women whose names he often did not know. And almost every detail checked out. Nothing he has ever said has been proven to be wrong or false. Those were the words of Holland himself, speaking to 60 Minutes in 2019. Little told Holland he had thought about his crimes in a very particular way. I got away with numerous murders of women in my life over the span of 50 years, he said. He showed no guilt, no grief. Instead, he described his victims with something closer to pride in how completely they had disappeared. Not from the world, but from official notice. Their deaths had been invisible to the system precisely because they were already invisible to the system. As the confessions continued, investigators across the country scrambled to reopen cold cases. DNA evidence and corroborating details from Little's descriptions were matched to known murders. In just over a year, more than 50 cold cases that had been dormant for decades were solved. Families received phone calls they had waited 30, 40 years for. In Georgia alone, investigators identified victims including Yvonne Pless, murdered in Macon in 1977, and Fredonia Smith, murdered there in 1982. Both identified decades after their deaths through forensic genealogy and Little's confessions. In November 2020, Little confessed to 2 Florida murders, one of which an innocent man had been wrongfully convicted of. He told investigators there were probably other innocent people in prison for crimes he had committed. Probably be numerous people who have been convicted and sent to penitentiary on my behalf, he said. I say, if I can help get somebody out of jail, God might smile a little bit more on me. On October 6, 2019, the FBI formally announced that Samuel Little was the most prolific serial killer in American history, with 60 confirmed victims, more than Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer combined. The FBI confirmed all 93 of his confessions as credible. He had killed more people than any other confirmed killer in the history of the United States. And for 35 years, he had done it without anyone even knowing his name was connected to those deaths. Samuel Little did not stop killing because he was caught. He stopped, by his own account, because age and illness finally took from him the physical strength he had relied on for 3.5 decades. His last known murder was in Tupelo, Mississippi in 2005. He was 64 years old. 7 years later, a drug arrest brought him back into the system's sight. 7 years after that, a Texas Ranger spent 700 hours sitting across from him, listening without flinching, until the full weight of what one man had done to 93 women across 19 states across 35 years finally found its way into a record. What made Samuel Little possible was not strength, though he was strong. It was not cunning, though he was calculating. It was indifference. The systematic devaluing of women who lived on the margins, whose deaths the system was structurally inclined to explain away rather than investigate. He knew it. He counted on it. He said so himself. In the end, the FBI confirmed 60 of his murders. 33 others he confessed to remain officially unmatched to known cases. There are women in those confessions who have still not been identified. There are families who still do not know. There are cold case files in departments across America that may belong to Samuel Little and may never be connected to him now that he is gone. Samuel Little died on December 30th, 2020, at a hospital in Los Angeles County. He was 80 years old. He died serving 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He never expressed remorse. He never apologized. He never gave his victims' families anything beyond what a Texas Ranger's patience managed to pull from him: a name, a description, a hand-drawn face, a road, a date. For some families, that was enough to finally begin. For others, the search continues.